Okay, hello students. Welcome to the final lecture for Bio 2. It is on conservation biology. It's a little short one, so this shouldn't be too bad. We're going to be covering biological magnification, freshwater pollution, deforestation, depletion of fish in the oceans, and global climate change. Yes, this lecture is all about depressing the holy shit out of you. So, put on your sad person caps, get ready to cry, and let's go through how humans are destroying the world. So the first up is biological magnification. So biological magnification or biomagnification is the concept in which pollutants in a freshwater system or a terrestrial system increase in concentration as you go up the food chain. So we have increase in toxin levels in higher levels of the food chain because toxins accumulate in fatty tissues. A great example would be something like mercury or PCBs. So in the picture right there we have PCBs. Mercury is also another awful pollutant emitted by various industrial applications, but in its largest part emitted by power plants. So what happens is these pollutants get into, we're going to go with an aquatic system, they get into an aquatic system and they are absorbed by the lowest levels of the food chain. So phytoplankton, then zooplankton, right? And the concept here is that predators, consumers, they have to eat multiple prey items in order to keep the energy necessary to stay alive, right? So phytoplankton, all they need to do is photosynthesize, right? Little photosynthetic organisms, they're pretty efficient. So they're not going to take up a whole lot of pollutants except by just diffusion. But when you get into the next predatory level, zooplankton, they have to eat multiple phytoplankton in order to maintain the energy levels required to stay alive. So, as you go on through the food chain, you get increases in concentration. So those zooplankton, which have 5 times as much PCBs in their bodies as the phytoplankton, then the smelt eat them and get nearly 10 times as much. Trout getting 4 times as much as the smelt, and then herring gull eggs finding ludicrously large levels of PCBs because of the amount of trout and smelt that they eat in order to stay alive. So same goes with mercury. We find mercury in relatively high concentrations in fish and then even in birds. Mercury is particularly dangerous because it impacts the brains of vertebrates. So vertebrates with our beautiful complex brains, mercury inhibits, or not inhibits, but it negatively impacts brain development. It results in lower mass of fish, higher predation rates. Fish aren't engaging anti-predator behavior as well. The birds who eat those fish and then get mercury poisoning have thinner shells. They have various malformations. They have lower hatchability, which means eggs aren't likely to develop correctly. So there's a lot of problems with the biomagnification of mercury in the food chain, not the least of which is the fact that, it affects mammals and humans. In the example here, we have herring gulls having 5,000 times as much PCBs in their eggs as phytoplankton, right? It's ludicrous. So in the case of humans or other mammals, we eat the fish or even the birds. Predators will eat the birds. We don't eat much in the way of herrings or seabirds. But sticking with fish, we can get mercury poisoned from eating fish. It's kind of scary. The FDA even has regulations on how much fish humans can safely eat, because there is no such thing at this point as a fish that is not tainted with mercury, because hooray, humanity! Okay, so pregnant women are advised to eat at most 8 to 12 ounces of fish per week. That is a small amount. So that is how dangerous biomagnification is. So humanity blows. Here's a great example of concentrations at trophic levels. So methylmercury in an aquatic food chain, a hypothetical aquatic food chain, right? We have 1 nanogram per liter, 1 part per trillion. And then it's absorbed into the various living things like bacteria and phytoplankton, 10 parts per trillion. And then organisms start eating them, get 10 times as much. And then you get onto insect larvae, fish fry, minnows. By the time we get to medium-sized fish, we're down to parts per million. And then in large predators like fish, birds, and humans, you get 10 parts per million of mercury concentration in their tissues. So biomagnification is awful. It is scary. So we need policies in place to limit pollutant contamination of aquatic ecosystems. People are not particularly interested in policies like that because it costs money, and God forbid we cut into profit margins. Okay, on to our nice little section on freshwater pollution. So, as we know, freshwater covers very small amounts of the globe, right? So, freshwater systems are very small, but they are also extremely valuable resources, right? They're the source of our drinking water. So without freshwater ecosystems, humans aren't doing so great. We're not farming. So they are both very small and very valuable. The small nature of freshwater systems makes them highly susceptible to contamination. So there are generally 2 modes of pollution of freshwater ecosystems. You have point source pollution. In point source pollution, we can actually track the pollution in the water to the original source or sources. In other words, we know where the pollution came from, and we can take action to stop that pollution, whether it's a factory or sewage treatment plants, right? We know the source, so we can, institute laws or technological solutions to cut off that point source of pollution. So the next kind is diffuse pollution. Diffuse pollution is somewhat more dangerous because it originates from large numbers of different locations. So our example here is runoff of nitrates and phosphates causing eutrophication. So you get nitrates and phosphates running off from literally anywhere that fertilizes the soil or the plants around them. So farms, lawns, golf courses, all sorts of different places will fertilize their land. And then rain runoff or floods will carry fertilizer to aquatic systems. So we cannot identify a single source of that pollution. So the only real solution to that one would be in education, trying to get people to realize what they're doing, maybe fertilize less or choose plants that live in their particular area, xeriscaping, which is where you plant native plants so that you don't have to water or fertilize your lawn. And you can avoid eutrophication of local water sources. Political action to try and limit how often fertilizing can occur. Then we're going to single out coal burning pollution. So coal pollution is pretty rough. This is because, so coal burning is for our power plants. Most of the power in the U.S. comes from coal burning power plants. This is really nasty because the smoke from burning coal gives off all sorts of awful products. So we just talked about mercury in the water, right? Biomagnifying in marine systems. Then we have acid rain. So sulfur oxide combines with water and produces sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid is now up in the atmosphere. So sulfur oxide is released in the process of coal burning. It goes up into the atmosphere, combines with water vapor in the atmosphere, and creates sulfuric acid, so that when rain forms, it is a mixture of water and sulfuric acid. This acidifies literally everything it comes into contact with. So acid rain will acidify waterways. And we've seen acid rain kill fish, cause fish die-offs. We've seen acid rain cause vegetation die-offs. If you look at Rome, find all those beautiful limestone statues, you will see them appear to be crying. They'll have discoloration along their eyes. That is simply because when it rains, water collects around those areas and runs down. And that is the acid rain discoloring these ancient statues. So acid rain is just awful. We do have some controls in place to try and limit acid rain. When we discovered just how terrible it was, the EPA put in rules to try and keep acid rain from getting too bad, but we still have it. And then, of course, mercury, which causes brain damage in humans. So when we're exposed to mercury just straight from the atmosphere, that's bad. And then there's the biomagnification problem. So coal-fired power plants are kind of awful. Is there a more cost-effective way to generate power? That's debatable. When you take into account, like if you apply a monetary value to environmental resources, coal-fired power plants actually become like prohibitively expensive. You know, between the mountaintop mining, where they blow the top off a mountain and let all the sediment from that mountain bury the surrounding areas and pollute waterways and everything, the mining of coal is just environmentally destructive. Then the burning of coal is just full of awful pollutants. And so, yes, it's cheap power, but if you apply a monetary value to the environment, that cheap power becomes really rough. But most of our power grid is based on coal-fired power plants, so there is not an easy solution in place. Nuclear power is nice and clean, relatively safe. So there haven't been any meltdowns since Chernobyl, when the Russians, I mean, they pretty much intended to melt that thing down. Chernobyl was not like an awful accident indicating nuclear power plants are unsafe. They ran that thing without its coolant rods on purpose to see what, I don't know, if they could destroy their entire town. Who knows? But yeah. Then there was 3 Mile Island in New York, which was a sort of a exaggeration. Everyone thinks it was much worse than it actually was. It was really minor. Even in Japan, when that tsunami, kicked the crap out of that nuclear power plant, there was very little in the way of consequences. Very little happened. So, nuclear power would be a pretty good alternative, along with wind and solar. It's just when it comes to wind power, we have to figure out how to not kill birds and bats, because those wind turbines do a pretty great job of killing birds and bats. And then solar, it's expensive to start off with solar panels, and there's recent promising research that will provide alternatives, but for now, we require a lot of rare metals to create a solar cell, and that requires some pretty awful mining practices. But there's recent research indicating that we might be able to replace those awful things with more environmentally friendly ingredients. By the way, speaking of which, mining is one of the awful consequences of battery-powered cars. So cars that have lithium batteries, lithium mining is actually sort of a horrific mining process. You produce a lot of pollution when you do a lithium mine. So you involve a fair amount of environmental destruction. So much so that, I think the Teslas are, have a net positive effect on the environment, but it's close when you take into account the damage caused by mining and production of batteries. So, hey, just a crap on your environmentally friendly fantasies. Okay. On to deforestation. This is the greatest threat to modern terrestrial ecosystems. It is awful because it results in habitat conversion. This is also called desertification. So literally throw the word desert down and then all word ification, I-F-I-C-A-T-I-O-N, desertification. Basically, what happens is that when you knock down all the trees, when you deforest an area, you remove the trees and you disrupt the water cycle. Remember from the end of the previous lecture, talked about how up to 90% of the water that falls in a tropical forest is transpired back into the atmosphere so that these tropical forests create their own rain. Well, when you knock down those forests, that transpiration is not occurring anymore. We disrupt the water cycle. The area where that forest is no longer gets as much rain, causing this environment to become more and more dry. You can actually get what appears to be deserts. So habitat conversion, desertification, is a major problem when it comes to deforestation. Then we have habitat loss. Obviously, when you knock down the forests, when you deforest an area, you remove all the habitats for the animals that lived in that forest, which particularly sucks because tropical forests are the greatest site of biodiversity. The most terrestrial organisms live in tropical forests, and tropical forests are exactly where deforestation is the worst. So we are causing major problems when it comes to loss of biodiversity through deforestation. Eutrophication, right? Bare land allows more water runoff. More water runoff causes eutrophication of local waterways. So not only are we, destroying the forest, we are causing the local waterways to become eutrophied, and we're killing the animals off in there, which we can see in the fact that erosion is magnified when you deforest an area, right? You had all those forests and various plants under the canopy having roots running through the topsoil, maintaining the topsoil. Once you kill the forests, once you kill all those plants, that topsoil is no longer held in place as well, so that rain and floods will carry large amounts of that topsoil into the local waterways. And that's one of the ways we get more eutrophication. And finally, carbon dioxide increases in concentration in the atmosphere when you deforest an area because photosynthesis takes in carbon dioxide and emits oxygen. So tropical forests, well, forests in general, are important for maintaining the oxygen content of the atmosphere. And they are carbon sinks. They help, remediate global warming. So when you knock down a forest, you make carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere worse. So, again, humans are terrible, awful things. Political action is about the only thing you can do to try and manage deforestation. You can try and push for laws in the U.S. Because we have our own rainforests here. We have the temperate rainforests up in Washington and Oregon, thereabouts. So those Pacific temperate rainforests, they are very important. They have a lot of biodiversity. And then you can also, try and put political pressure on other countries to reduce deforestation. Yeah, humans suck. This is a picture of the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic actually has laws in place in order to limit logging and try and preserve tropical forests. Whereas Haiti basically allows wholesale logging of its forests, so there's wholesale amounts of deforestation. And so you can see not only on the Dominican side are the tropical forests much more beautiful. On the Haiti side, you can actually see desertification taking place. Those look like the kinds of, brown scrubby plants that we get out here in Colorado, where precipitation levels are extremely low. So, yeah, deforestation is bad. Here's a graph showing deforestation in the U.S. From 1650 to 1926. So over the course of something like just 225 years, or whatever, 275 years, we go from the top left, showing all that beautiful virgin U.S. forest pre-European exploitation, to the bottom right, where we have post-European and American exploitation, and the amount of virgin forest in the U.S. Has become tiny and fragmented. So it's even worse now, although there are environmental laws in place, public lands, where we're trying to manage that. So, again, political action, laws, those are the best way to try and save forests. Okay, so on to even more depressing, which is depletion of fish in the oceans, right? So fishing, commercial fishing is a major industry, right? We are relying on fish as a major food source. Of course, in the past 50 years, populations of large fish species have decreased 90%. 90%. Tuna, swordfish, marlin, most, if not all, sharks, cod, halibut, flounder, all these fish species have decreased from their original populations by 90%. It's thought that most, if not all, commercially valuable fish stocks could completely collapse by 2048. That's 32 years from now. In 32 years, these fish stocks could collapse, meaning there are no longer enough of them to provide a population for fishing, let alone for survival. I mean, so we need better policies regarding the industries. So good policies could be things like taking a year off from fishing, providing size limits on fish taken, providing fisheries where you are not allowed to fish, places where, a lot of the fish development occurs. Because a lot of these large species have long maturation times. So a surprising number of these large stock fish, especially sharks, are K-selected, where they have few offspring, and it takes them a long time to mature. So, you know, the level of fishing is pretty awful. In addition, just to make it that much worse, when fish populations decline and you don't get as much money from them, poaching of terrestrial animals tends to increase. So because people are no longer able to survive on fish or make a living off of fishing, they look to terrestrial animals and valuable terrestrial animals, and they kill them. So in the graph, we can see in the blue the biomass taken by fishing, and in the red, the estimated total biomass of these commercially valuable fish in the ecosystem. And you can see in the last couple decades, it has been plummeting. The total biomass has been plummeting. That's because people have been largely fishing unregulated. So we are about to lose large amounts of biodiversity in the oceans because we want to eat fish. There's an app you can download. Let's see, I have it on my phone so that I can remember the name of it. Where is it? Come here. The thingy. Did I delete it? Oh, yeah, I probably deleted it. So the Monterey Bay Aquarium has an app available for your phones that tells you what kind of fish to buy that will support responsible fishing. So if you want to know how to still eat fish but eat it responsibly, look up the Monterey Bay fish purchasing app, or I think they have the website as well. So if you don't want to roll through the smartphone way, you can just look up the Monterey Bay's fish to buy website. Then we get on to global warming. So global warming is caused by an increase in what we call greenhouse gases. So carbon dioxide, methane, various other gases. So basically, greenhouse gases limit the ability of heat to leave the system. So the sun enters the Earth's atmosphere, warms up the planet, but a fair amount of that light is reflected back into space. There are a number of gases, the greenhouse gases, that when concentrated in the atmosphere, they interfere with the reflection of heat and light back into space. And so that heat and light, the heat gets retained in the system. And so global warming is the increase in average global temperature due to increased concentrations of greenhouse gases. The source of these are fossil fuel burning, oil, coal, and then loss of carbon dioxide sinks, right? Big photosynthesis sinks like tropical forests. When we mow down the forests, deforest places, we lose big carbon dioxide sinks. We have a ton of cattle, ruminants, that we rely on for food. And they are a giant source of methane. So yes, they're farts. And then there are a number of greenhouse gases locked in permafrost. So when you get out to, when you get in north or south far enough in latitude, you find tundra, primarily northern latitudes. And these tundras are basically where we find something called permafrost, where we have soil that is permanently frozen. So there's all sorts of things locked underneath that layer of permafrost. And as the temperature increases, that permafrost is going to defrost, and then all the stuff trapped under it is going to be released. And we think that may be, when the permafrost melts, that may be one of the largest overall increases in greenhouse gases, because so many greenhouse gases are locked under that layer of permafrost. So if we get to the point where the permafrost melts, we may rapidly reach a point where we cannot I don't want to say survive, but we'll cross that 2 degrees Celsius warming point, and the planet will become very different. Okay, so there's a ton of evidence for global warming. Global warming is the term for what's happening to global average temperatures. What global warming is causing is climate change, right? We're getting big fluctuations in climate all over the place. We can see ice-free seasons in the northern and southern latitudes lasting 2.5 weeks longer or more. At the North Pole, we have less and less polar ice. And we're seeing fewer and fewer glaciers, right? The glaciers are melting and receding. So we're seeing the effects of that increased temperature. And when we track temperature matched with carbon dioxide increases in the atmosphere, we can see we have a highly, highly correlated map there. So when you take that long average, and this is just 1960 to like 2009, so we have more records than that, and we can show that global warming is just sort of occurring at a more rapid rate than we'd hoped, and that it is real and it is bad. So here's a picture of a receding glacier. 1875 on the left is when the Pastöse, whatever glacier, let's see, that's Germany. Pastöse! When the Pastöse glacier was first photographed in 1875 there, you can see how large it is. And then in 2004, you take a picture and it's kind of not there. So, yeah, the glaciers are disappearing. There's Glacier National Park in Colorado, and if you go up there, that glacier has receded significant amounts. So, let's talk about the species effects. So, how global warming impacts non-human species. We will see big shifts in geographic range. We're already seeing shifts in geographic range. This can be beneficial to some species. Some species will see their range expanded. A larger number will see their range negatively impacted. Remember, I talked about those marmots that cannot handle warmer temperatures. Well, as the global average temperatures increase, the alpine temperatures where they live will increase as well, and they will have to migrate further up the mountain, and that eventually they cannot migrate further up the mountain and they'll go extinct. And so we're going to see that with a large number of species. The mosquitoes that cause malaria are starting to see range expansion because they thrive in warmer temperatures. So ain't that great? Migratory birds are starting to arrive earlier at their summer breeding grounds. Tree swallows are starting to breed on average 9 days earlier than in the 1950s, which, I mean, that's great for the swallows, I guess, but you know, you're going to see a lot of negative impacts as well. So that's insects and amphibians are also starting to breed earlier. So you may get bumps in their population. And that can negatively affect their environment around them by producing a greater population. You can hit one of those big cycles where you get a crash of amphibians or insects, and then you'll get a crash of their predator populations. So you may create a more volatile ecosystem by getting more successful breedings within a single breeding season. And then probably one of the scariest ones is coral bleaching. So when temperatures increase to a certain point, when water temperatures increase to a certain point, corals, which remember are a cnidarian living in a symbiotic relationship with an algae called a zooxanthellae, Zooxanthallae, or Thellallae, zooxanthellae. These zooxanthellae algae live within the cnidarians, and they build those nice, beautiful calcium carbonate coral structures. But when temperatures get just warm enough, those cnidarians actually expel all of their symbiotic algae. We're not sure why yet, but they expel them out of their bodies, and then without the algae to provide nutrients, they die. And without the corals, or without the cnidarians, the algae die. And so what you get is these coral reefs dying out. And what's left behind are the white calcium carbonate skeletons. We call that coral bleaching. And we're starting to see scarily high levels of coral bleaching. There are people talking about how by mid-century, we may see the extinction of coral reefs, which is scary because that's the largest source of biodiversity in the oceans. So we're deforesting terrestrial environments, losing the largest source of biodiversity there, and then we're going to cause, the extinction of coral reefs and lose the largest source of marine biodiversity. So this planet is going to become something icky. So then we have the human effects, so the effects on humans, right? So we're going to see rising sea levels. As the Arctic ice and the Antarctic ice melts, the sea levels will rise. It's just not any kind of water world, Kevin Costner, Mount Everest is the only land left kind of sea level rises, but even a 1 meter sea level rise can wreak havoc on coastal cities. So you'll get greater flooding of coastal cities and islands. You may see submergence of some coastal cities and islands. I think New Orleans has large parts of it that are technically under the sea level, below sea level. So, you get that rising water, you may lose New Orleans. So you'll get greater occurrences of extreme climatic events. So increased frequencies of big, powerful hurricanes. We've already seen some of that. It's hard to pin some of these big storms that have happened in the last 10 years directly on global warming, on climate change, but it's relatively easy to recognize that climate change had most likely an effect in the creation of these large storms. We're going to see effects on the El Nino cycles. So you're going to see changes in how El Nino and La Nina periods occur. You're going to see more tropical cyclones, which are hurricanes in the Pacific. So they're hurricanes in the Atlantic, cyclones in the Pacific. There was these extreme climatic events are going to occur. We're going to get big alterations in precipitation. So we're going to see desertification of areas just because of a lack of precipitation. California is already reeling in a major drought that has been going on for, I think, a decade now, whereas other places are going to see record rains. So it's going to have big effects on crop productions, right? The breadbaskets of the world may see droughts, and you may see crop production being moved to other places. And in general, it's going to wreak havoc on global food supplies. So then we're going to see flooding, like I mentioned, increased precipitation in areas causing floods, increased sea levels causing floods. One of the big problems with floods is that you can have contaminated drinking water. So drinking water may get contaminated, and you'll see things like cholera becoming more common. So it happened after that big hurricane hit Haiti. Cholera became a big problem because we had contaminated drinking water sources, well contamination, and it was hard for people to, purify well water. So disease can become more common. And speaking of which, we mentioned how you may get range expansion of mosquitoes. Well, mosquitoes are just amazing at carrying human pathogens. So you're going to see increases in malaria. You're going to see increases in dengue fever, increases in most mosquito-borne diseases. So what can you do to prevent the coming apocalypse? No, that may be a little too much. Not far off, but a little much. So what can you do to try and manage global warming on your own? Decrease your personal use of fossil fuels. So, even things as stupid and simple as turning off lights when they're not in use. Living with a little bit more sweat and keeping your AC at like 76 or 78 will cause it to come on less. You'll save energy there. Find ways to take public transportation instead of driving. So there are some various relatively simple things you can do to reduce your fossil fuel use. And that can, in fact, have a decent impact. So if you get enough people taking this, taking little things, little actions, you can have big effects. So I think roughly 90% of cars are carrying like one person. So maybe I shouldn't apply an actual percent to that because I don't know the actual percent. But I know in the U.S., the majority of vehicles on the road are carrying between 1 and 2 people. That's so sad that our friggin' toll lanes consider high occupancy vehicles, HOV, to be 2 people. High occupancy is 2 people? That's how bad the problem of everybody driving just themselves around is. So, yeah. Find a way to drive less or take public transportation, manage your energy use, and then you can find other ways to decrease your ecological footprint. So maybe eat a little less meat, even though meat is delicious. And try and get active politically, right? We've got the old guard, the older generation of Americans, which are not real receptive to climate change, but younger generations, well, not necessarily receptive, but not real worried, I guess is the word. So the 50, 60, 70-year-old folks aren't really seeing climate change as dangerously as it is. So you're getting a lot of those ludicrous political discussions where people are like, there's no evidence for anthropogenic climate change, or that, oh my God, that intellectually deficient senator, I think it's Inhofe, who threw a snowball in the Senate and then said, there's your climate change, as if the presence of snow negated all evidence of climate change. People who ignore the fact that climate scientists support climate change. Like, Oh, gods. I'm going to rant about anti-science in politics. I need to not do that because my head will explode, my heart will explode, the pressure, I can't take it. But do what you can to combat anti-science sentiments and vote for people who have scientific literacy or respect scientific literacy. There's good news, right? Surveys of younger Republicans show that younger Republicans they, I hate to use the term believe in, they acknowledge the evidence for anthropogenic climate change, human-caused climate change. So, you may not see the classic Republican anti-climate change attitude as these younger Republicans vote more. So yeah, get involved politically. Vote for people who have scientific literacy or support scientific literacy. Reduce your ecological footprint. Reduce your fossil fuel use. There are things to be done that can limit the negative impacts of climate change that we are now stuck with. Yeah, we can take steps to try and make it not as bad. So, yeah, there are things you can do. That is the takeaway here. Don't, cry in a corner with vodka, or after crying in a corner with liquor, get up and take steps to combat it, because you can do things about it. You are legion. There are so many of you young people now. You can vote. You can change things. Young people are statistically the least likely to turn out in elections, especially in those 2-year Congress and Senate elections. So, for God's sakes, go out, get involved locally and vote for the, local county and city elections, as well as the congressional elections and the Senate elections, as well as just the presidential elections. So please do something about it, or help me do something about it. All right. See you tomorrow for the big final. And I'll have to remember which button stops the lecture. No, that's not it. Maybe I just got to do this.